Next up here, we have another pretty interesting defensive tackle prospect in the way of Jay Tufele out of USC, who, hopping right into his sort of background stats as well as his pro day stuff. The first thing you're going to see, obviously, is the opt out in 2020. And that is, with so many of the guys that we've talked about to this point, that's incredibly relevant because, the most important film whenever you're looking at prospect is what they've done most recently, right? Because that's the closest thing to what you're getting is what you saw last. And with a guy like him, the last thing you saw was in December of 2019, compared to, say, Osa Odigizua or Christian Barmore or Davion Nixon, guys like that, who the most recent thing was in December 2020 or January 2021. I think that's sort of a cause for pause off the bat in terms of what exactly are you going to be getting? Are you getting the guy you saw in 2019? Are you getting a guy who's better, who's more refined in his skill set, who's stronger, faster, more physically developed? Or are you getting a guy who's kind of slacked off for the last year? You really don't know. The only thing you kind of have to look to in that regard would be the pro day numbers. And I do think that it shows that, with the 4.9740, the 30 reps on bench, the pretty explosive 30-inch vert or the 8-foot 9-inch broad, I think that you do see a guy who's clearly kept working pretty dang hard, because those are very solid numbers. The only question is, will that sort of weight room strength and shape translate again to on the field in the NFL? And obviously game shape isn't quite the same thing as just being well conditioned. Well, obviously he's still well conditioned, but how is that going to translate on the field? I think that's a question, but I think that when you really put back on those 2018 and 19 films, I think that, what you see is something that, as long as he can return or potentially surpass that level, I think that you're going to get a very balanced and solid prospect, right? I think that you have a guy who, unlike, say, a Tyler Shelvin, who I did a previous video, obviously, if you haven't seen that, click the link above my head. But, say with Shelvin, you had a guy who was only a run defender, right? He offered nothing other than that. He was a strict nose, had no versatility, no nothing, right? Well, I think with Tufele, you have a guy who he could play anywhere on your defensive front, 1 through 4, sometimes 5, right? USC would use him as a 5 tech. I probably wouldn't, but he could be a 1 tech at his weight, at his strength. He could also be a 3 tech sometimes at his level of explosion. And I think that he has the hand technique in particular, as you can see in terms of his block recognition and awareness, as well as block shedding. I think that he could also be a 4 technique if you run a 3-4 team, if you run a 3-4 scheme, I should say. I think that he offers a lot of versatility in that regard, and I think that no matter what role you put him in, he could pretty easily translate into a 3-down player. I'm not really sure what the apparent weakness is in his game. Besides, one thing that I did want to touch on would be his motor. I think that with Tufele, it's interesting because, I'll contrast his motor and his block recognition and awareness, right? Because that's the lowest motor grade I've given anybody. That's the highest block recognition grade I've given anybody. So to me, what I see there is I see a guy who is pretty football smart, right? I see a guy who, if there's a down block by his pressure key and offensive tackle, if he's a 3 tech in this instance, down block here, pulling guard there. What's that mean? That means the play is going to the outside. He, almost instantly recognizes, I got to fight over the top of that tackle because it's likely a toss, power, something away from me. They're going to take me to the ball. Similarly, if you have a guard trying to reach him, right, he's able to realize that, okay, he's trying to cut me off from going in that direction, fight over the top of that, go make the play. He's very smart and intelligent in that way, right? His mental processing is clearly there. But I also think that is sort of the biggest downside to his game, in a sense, in terms of it looks like he's clearly processing when he thinks he can and cannot make plays, and when he thinks he needs to and doesn't need to give effort. And I think that to me is sort of a question mark. Obviously, that's something I'd like to know and talk about to him in interviews. Of course, don't have access to those, but I think that's certainly interesting because, if he thinks he's in a play, he's going to give it his all. He's going to give it 100%, right? No questions there. But, when he doesn't think he's reasonably in a play, he's walking, he's watching, he's not really going to keep fighting. And that is sort of, to me, a question mark, and I'll say it's not something that you can't fix. You look at, say, Myles Garrett. He had, in my opinion, when he was coming out his last season, he had a pretty rough motor, right? He kind of like Tufele. He watched more plays than he actually made. But at the same time, instead of flipping that switch on and off at the college level, we've seen him come to the NFL, realize, hey, now I can, put that switch on full time. I'm going to get $20+ million. I'm going to be one of the best players in the league. You've seen that out of Miles. You've seen that switch flip on permanently, and it's manifested incredibly well. I think with Tufele, the question is, what direction is he going to go in? Is he going to be content that, hey, now I'm in the league, we can kind of coast a little bit more than we used to? Or is he going to be the opposite and be a guy like Garrett, who he's going to, flip it on all the time? And he's going to, instead of showing flashes of dominance and greatness, he's going to channel that on a play in, play out basis. Because if he does, you're going to get a great value. You're going to get a great value wherever you pick him in day 2, potentially day 3, depending on where he goes. But if he's not able to channel that and he trends the other direction, in terms of, kind of slacking off a little bit, which also has me worried about the opt-out, because he did choose to take a season off. I'm never going to penalize somebody for opting out in this circumstance, but I think that with him, given my motor concerns, it is a little bit more of a question. But regardless, I think that it's an interesting discussion to be had, because what you're going to see here, 72.5, really good prospect all around. If you took out his motor grade, he would be my 3rd highest defensive tackle on the board. So what are we going to do with that? Are we going to overdraft him potentially and take him above those next couple guys because I think he's a more talented and well-rounded prospect, and just hope he figures out the motor? Or are we going to really factor it in and maybe penalize him a little bit for that opt-out, and at least ask him about it? Obviously I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't penalize him for that here in my strictly film-based grade, but I think that it's a concern, right? Because I think that, again, he's easily worthy of a low to even middle of the second round selection. The question is that switch going to be flipped on or off? Or is it just going to be inconsistent as it is now? Because I think that, he could be solid as he is now. I think he could be really good if it's switched on. And I think that he could potentially be kind of a bust if it's switched off. If he's a guy who, hey, that first paycheck looks pretty nice, and hey, I didn't even have to play college football last year, I got paid, let's just kind of chill a little bit. If he's one of those guys, then I'm not sure how long he'll last in this league. But if he's the opposite guy, and I really do hope that he is, because those pro day numbers look good and it looks like he has been working pretty hard. So I hope he's the opposite guy. I hope he's going to flip that switch on all the time at the next 12. And I do think that a team could get something really good here out of Jay Tufele, depending on where they take him. So that being said, if you guys did enjoy this video, if you've watched and scouted Tufele yourself, let me know what your thoughts were in the comment section down below. Do you see sort of the same thing I see in terms of really balanced in both sort of facets of the game, against the run, as a pass rusher? And do you see the motor concerns as well, or is that just me kind of nitpicking him a little bit, in your opinion? Obviously, it's up for debate. This isn't a science by any means, but I'd love to hear what your guys' thoughts are in the comment section down below. And other than that, make sure you leave a like, make sure you subscribe, and make sure you tune into the next video, because with that being said, I'm mic'd up. Now I'm mic'ing out. Peace, guys.